please do not import cattle or sheep or goats from Europe. The risk is too big. Even with the certification requirements and the pre-movement blood sampling, there is still a risk. So we would urge farmers to think very, very carefully, is it worth it to you, to your neighbours, to the Irish livestock industry to take that risk? When animals do come in, we have post-entry controls. We blood sample them twice. We're also doing a lot of active surveillance, Catherine. So we are testing animals in areas of the country, particularly the east and the southeast, where we think midges may blow across the Irish Sea and introduce infection. That's so that we can detect infection at an early stage before it spreads.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, Dr. Eoin Ryan, Senior Superintending Veterinary Inspector with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, gives an update on the Bluetongue virus. Eoin, you're very welcome. Since the end of August, over 100 cases of Bluetongue have been detected in England and Wales. Farmers are hearing more and more about it. What is the Bluetongue virus?
Bluetongue is a viral disease. It's a virus that affects cattle, sheep, goats, alpacas, other ruminants, and camelids like llamas. For Ireland, I guess the most important species are cattle and sheep. The first thing that I want to say to make it really clear is Bluetongue is not a food safety issue. It doesn't affect public health. It doesn't infect human beings, but it certainly affects human beings because there has been some huge outbreaks in other countries which have had really serious impacts on the farmers who own those animals and on people involved in industry. And that's why I want to talk about it today. It's spread by biting midges mainly. So that means that if you have an infected animal beside another animal, it won't spread directly. What's needed is a midge to bite the infected animal. The midge becomes infected. And then when that midge bites another animal, it passes the infection on. And the midges that spread the virus are present in Ireland. So that, that's a real risk for us. There's many different serotypes of Bluetongue, Catherine. There's actually over 24. But the serotype, which is the strain of the virus, which is of most concern to us now, is Bluetongue serotype 3. And that's the one you'll see in the media, BTV3, which was first detected in the Netherlands about a year ago and has spread rapidly across Northern and Western Europe. And unfortunately, it's spread across Eastern and Central England. And there's even been isolated cases on the west coast of Wales. So a big threat for Ireland and something that we really want to raise awareness of.
And what are the clinical signs in the animals, Eoin?
The clinical signs can vary. They range from things like fever, loss of appetite, drop in milk yield. That's been reported in a lot of dairy cows. A reddening of the lips and the muzzle and what we call the mucous membranes. So kind of reddened eyes, reddened mouth, reddened muzzle, sores on the nose and on the gums and on the dental pads, a swelling of the face, swelling of the lips and swelling of the tongue. Breathing difficulties, drooling, a discharge from the eyes and the nose. Animals can become lame. Pregnant animals can abort, and you can have deformed fetuses. And in many cases, death can result. And the reason it's called Bluetongue, Catherine, is the virus actually infects the cells that line the sides of the blood vessels in animals. And it disrupts those cells. And that's why the tongue can look very kind of hyperemic and purpley, almost blue in infected sheep and cattle. So it doesn't always cause a blue tongue, but it's quite a distinctive sign if it is seen. But one of the challenges, Catherine, with these clinical signs is they're not very specific. So the list that I've just read out there, that could be one of several diseases. And that's why it's so important to report suspect cases, because it can look like a case of something else. And it's really important that we investigate suspect cases. So a whole range of these. And look, there's photos and videos on our website, the Department of Agriculture website. If people type in DAFM BTV, that they should be able to find that on Google. But really, particularly if people watch out for those kind of reddened muzzles, a reddened nose, reddened eyes, being off form, being sick, milk drop, abortions, deformed fetuses, and then particularly that kind of purpley, bluey look to the tongue.
And you mentioned there how it has spread throughout Europe, particularly from the Netherlands. What's the current situation in Europe at the moment?
The situation at the moment, to be short, it has spread really very widely across Northern and Western Europe from its first appearance last autumn. So it was first detected in the Netherlands in September 2023. And quite soon, within the first 4 months, there was about 5,000 holdings had been affected. And unfortunately, approximately 55,000 sheep died in the Netherlands in those first few months last autumn. That had a hugely devastating impact on farmers who were affected by this. So, you can imagine yourself just how awful that was. It spread rapidly then through Belgium and Germany, and successfully overwintered. What I mean by that is that when winter came and the midges died, we all know when the temperatures get cold, you don't see midges around. The virus can actually survive the winter. It can survive a number of ways. It can survive through infected animals that have a long-lasting infection if they're not detected. It can survive in infected fetuses. If a pregnant cow or sheep becomes infected with bluetongue, the infection can pass, particularly in cattle, to the unborn calves. And when those calves are born, then months later, they can start a new outbreak because they're infectious. And it can also spread because, as we know, sometimes in a warm corner of a shed, some midges might survive. It's rare, but it can happen, and they can make it through the winter. So in spring 2024, a few months ago, unfortunately, BTV3 reappeared in the Netherlands, particularly also parts of Belgium and Germany, and then spread through the summer very quickly through France, Luxembourg, Denmark, Switzerland, Norway, the Czech Republic, right down. I think it's down to Croatia now, and very significantly for us, Catherine, it spread to England. So the English had a few cases last autumn, this time last year, where infected midges were blown across the North Sea from the Netherlands, and they infected some animals along the east coast of England. But at that stage, it was too cold for the disease to spread because there wasn't very many midges around at that stage. It was kind of October, November, the temperatures had dropped. So although our English colleagues detected infected animals, there wasn't very much disease per se, and it didn't spread more widely. So that was quite fortunate. But this year, they weren't as lucky. They had more spread, more midges being blown across from the continent this summer, and their first outbreak of this year's vector season was confirmed on the 26th of August 2024 at the very eastern tip of England. And very rapidly, it spread right across the east coast, the southeast, and the northeast of England, from Yorkshire right down to Sussex. Unfortunately, there's 129 premises affected right across that part of England now, right along the east and centre of England down to the southeast. And there's also been some forward traced cases in Western England and Western Wales. The important thing to note about those, Catherine, is these aren't local spread cases in Wales. They're cases where before people knew there was an outbreak, they had moved sheep or cattle from Eastern England to Western Wales, which is perfectly fine. And subsequently then, of course, the origin areas turned out to have bluetongue. And when they forward traced animals, they found infected animals in as far west as Anglesey, which is a big concern for Ireland, of course, just a short ferry ride across the Irish Sea from Dublin. So the situation now is that we're really the last country in northern and western Europe which has not had an outbreak of bluetongue serotype 3, and it's a major concern for us.
Particularly the risk of it coming to Ireland with regard it being in England, and as you mentioned, the spread throughout Europe has been very rapid. How can we prevent it coming?
Look, there's a number of things, Catherine, that we're doing to address this risk. You're right that this is a big risk for us now. It's a significant threat to Ireland and to Irish livestock farmers. I think the things we're doing to import the risk. First of all, the import of live animals is a major source of risk for us. So live animals have not been that is live susceptible species, cattle, sheep, goats, lambs, and alpacas, haven't been able to be imported from Great Britain since last autumn. And also there's import controls on the import of those animals from infected areas of Europe, which are large parts of Europe. There's quite complex animal health certification requirements if you want to import those animals from Europe to reduce that risk. And what we're doing is sending a clear message to farmers: please do not import cattle or sheep or goats from Europe. The risk is too big, even with the certification requirements and the pre-movement blood sampling. There is still a risk of inadvertently bringing in infected animals. So we would urge farmers to think very, very carefully. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to you, to your neighbours, to the Irish livestock industry to take that risk? When animals do come in, we have post-entry controls. We blood sample them twice. We carry out a lot of controls to reduce that risk. We're also doing a lot of active surveillance, Catherine. So we are testing animals in areas of the country, particularly the east and the southeast, where we think midges may blow across the Irish Sea and introduce infection. That's so that we can detect infection at an early stage before it spreads. We also are carrying out a lot of testing in our regional veterinary laboratories of aborted fetuses or animals that look like they might have something that could be bluetongue. So, for instance, if an animal's of milk drop or they have a hemorrhagic infection, to try and catch it early. So, really, and the other thing we're trying to do to address this risk is get the message out. If you have an animal that looks like it could have bluetongue, please do report it so that we can tackle the outbreak before it spreads rather than after it has spread. So that's it in a nutshell, Catherine.
I suppose, no one can forget the strict protocols that were put in place back in 2001 to prevent foot and mouth, and the fact that this is spread by midges, it will be harder to control. At what stage will a full ban be put in place to stop livestock coming from the UK and across Europe?
Well, I suppose the first point to make is it's quite a different disease from foot and mouth disease. Bluetongue is not like foot and mouth or avian influenza or African swine fever, in that because it isn't directly contagious. By what I mean by that is it doesn't spread directly from one animal to another. The whole herd or the whole flock is often not affected. So the first point to make to people is, if there is an outbreak of bluetongue in a herd or a flock, we probably would not cull all the animals in it. It would probably be just the positive animals. So that's a big difference from foot and mouth. So to give an example, from the experience from our colleagues in Europe and in Eastern England has been that you might have 5, 10, 15 infected animals in a herd or a flock. So those animals would be culled to reduce the risk of onward spread. But other animals in the flock or the herd are unlikely to be culled. So that's one big difference from the foot and mouth case in 2001. The situation with imports from Great Britain, they have been banned since November last year because the UK is, of course, outside the EU, and they are unable to satisfy the certification requirements to export susceptible species into the EU. So there are no cattle, sheep, goats, alpacas or llamas entering Ireland or any other EU country from Great Britain. As regards movements from the continent, there are controls in place in large parts of the continent that are under bluetongue restrictions. But I think one of the big risks that people thinking about importing need to be aware of is if you purchase cattle or sheep on the continent and then try to send them to Ireland, by the time you do that, bluetongue is moving so quickly that area may have come under bluetongue restrictions at that stage, and you may find yourself unable to move those cattle, unable to move those sheep, because the certification requirements, the animal health certification requirements, can't be fulfilled. So there's a lot of controls in place. So we really want to send that message. Importing animals is a risk, even with the controls that are in place, and we really would discourage it and ask people to think very carefully before importing cattle. I'd also like to mention germinal products, Catherine, because live animals are not the only source of risk. Semen and embryos can also be infectious, and there's been reports in previous years of outbreaks in France due to infected semen. And again, there's controls in place, there's testing in place, but they're not foolproof. And one of the things we're concerned about is the risk of people importing semen, importing embryos from affected areas, and inadvertently bringing in bluetongue into Ireland through that route. So we would really urge, think very carefully. Do you really need to import semen from areas affected by bluetongue? Think carefully about the potential risk to your own herd, to your own flock, and also to your neighbours and others in the area.
Most definitely, Eoin. Vaccination against the strain that you've mentioned has been approved in Britain and the other EU member states. At what stage is vaccination recommended?
It's an emergency vaccination, and really what that means in a nutshell is the vaccine has not achieved its EU marketing authorization yet. It's approved under emergency use. Now, the reason for that is, of course, since Bluetongue 3 is quite a new disease in Europe, it's completely understandable that the vaccines developed for it would also be new. So they've been approved for emergency use in the EU member states and separately in the UK. That vaccine, though, it's not perfect. There's 3 different vaccines that have been developed. All 3 are in use. Pretty much every country affected by BTV3 has approved their use. They reduce the clinical signs. They reduce the severity of the disease. They reduce the amount of blood, of virus in the blood. and that probably contributes to reducing transmission. But they don't provide, full, complete immunity against the disease. So they're not a guarantee of no infection of bluetongue, but they do have a significant effect of reducing the severity of the disease. But something that is an important piece of information for Irish farmers is because these these vaccines have been approved under emergency legislation and they're not fully authorized, they can't be used for trade purposes. Their duration of immunity hasn't been defined yet. So for that reason, if an animal has been vaccinated against Bluetongue 3 at the moment, it cannot be exported. It can't move to another member state. And that is the reason why vaccinated cattle and sheep can't be brought from other member states into Ireland.
The virus, from all you've said already, it posed a huge threat to Ireland. What implications could it have if it enters Ireland?
Very serious implications, Catherine. I suppose thinking about it from farm level outwards, first of all, there's been some really heartbreaking stories in the media of what Dutch farmers, German farmers, French farmers have gone through with the animal losses they've had. It's a terrible thing to see your cattle, your sheep become sick. Many of them die. To have milk drop if you're a dairy farmer, to have abortions, deformed lambs, deformed calves be born. So there's a huge impact. And as I said at the start, bluetongue doesn't infect people. It's not a public health issue, but it certainly affects people. And it is a terrible thing for farmers to have to deal with this disease, the losses and the stress of seeing that. And there's obviously a financial cost to these losses. Zooming outward a little bit, for the wider industry, there's losses through this mortality in sheep and cattle, disease losses, less milk. It can really affect the industry. And for trade, if you've animals from affected areas, they can't be exported. They can't go outside the zone. So that could be a big issue for anybody who's involved in exporting animals. Anybody who hopes to export stock next spring, bluetongue must be a major risk for them. There's also a risk to our market access outside the EU, because for some of those countries that we trade with outside the EU, they may reconsider if we have an outbreak of bluetongue, because at the moment Ireland, of course, has a very high health status. We've fantastic level of meat and milk products, and it's renowned throughout the world. And I think it probably would be helpful to our trade to have a bluetongue outbreak. So it would affect farmers, but not just farmers. I think anybody involved in the livestock industry or the animal products industry could really feel the pain if we have an outbreak of bluetongue, Catherine.
Finally, is there any key messages you have for farmers that's listening in?
There are. I think there's three messages I want to convey. First of all, it's really important to report any suspect cases of bluetongue. I know that nobody wants to bring trouble in their own farm, but if we find a bluetongue case early, we can stop it spreading. It's really critical. Please do report any suspect cases to the Department of Agriculture. Report it to your regional veterinary office during or outside business hours. You can phone our after hours emergency hotline, which is 01 492 8026. But please do report suspects. Second of all, I really want to emphasize that imports are a risk. Importing live animals, importing semen, importing embryos. I would really urge people, think about it. Think about the risk. Think about the risk to your own herd, your flock, and to your neighbours and to the industry. We really would discourage people from taking that risk and putting the industry at risk. And the final message is, Catherine, we actually have a chance here. We have a chance that other countries didn't have, because it's towards the end of the year. It's getting colder. There's not as many midges around. If we are unlucky enough to have a bluetongue outbreak in Ireland, we actually do have a chance of stopping it. If people report it early, we can get ahead of it. And that's something that other countries didn't necessarily have. So look, there is hope, and we can deal with this if we work quickly and work together.
Thanks very much, Eoin. That's a great insight into the Bluetongue virus, and we look forward to further updates in the coming weeks. We also look forward to Eoin joining us at the National Beef Conference taking place in Carrigan-Shannon on the 19th of November for a further detailed update on the Bluetongue virus. That's all for this week's episode. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.